What's up, guys? Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Brady Swenson. Brady is the host and creator of the Citizen Bitcoin podcast. Many of you will know Brady already. For those of you who don't, he's got one of the top podcasts in the space. He's interviewed a ton of awesome people, and he does a really great job as host and interviewer. So if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend you do so. This is the primary portion of my conversation with Brady, so we took about 90 minutes and just geeked out on Bitcoin. Really fun chat, really enjoyed it, and I suspect you will as well. If you want to hear more from Brady after that, the rapid fire episode is available now also. That's it. Enjoy.
Let's do it.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the show, dude.
Thanks for coming on. Such an it's pleasure to speak with you. Such an experienced hand in the space. This will be fun.
Yeah, that's funny. I've been here for like a couple years, and that's experience. That's enough experience.
Well, in this space, sure. Where are you calling from?
I live in Lawrence, Kansas. So this is my co-working space where I have my office.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
And so do you do mostly freelance stuff or for your fiat job, for your normal job?
Yeah, mostly freelance stuff. I'm kind of like in the midst of switching over to Bitcoin full time. So I'm trying to monetize the podcast and working on some side projects, just trying to build up that street cred.
Right. Yeah, I spoke with Stefan last week and talked about that kind of transition. I think he made it at the beginning of June, and yeah, he was pretty stoked about it, as you could imagine.
Yeah, man, I'm happy for him. Yeah, that's the goal. That's definitely the goal. But at the same time, you got to keep that fiat job as long as possible so you can, keep stacking sats. So it's like you gotta figure out when you're happy with your stack and you're ready to just kind of like devote.
When the trade-off, like the quality of life trade-off versus the stack, Exactly.
I'm kind of waiting for this next run, I think, to make it happen and probably sell.
It'll be interesting to see, because obviously if it's anything like previous runs, there'll be a lot more attention, a lot more people looking to understand this stuff. And, the existing quote unquote media properties, I guess, stand to receive a lot of that attention. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, for sure.
When do you think it's going to be?
How about you? Where are you at? Oh, God. I don't know. I think it'll start sometime next year. I mean, I think it's already started. I think we kind of had got a little bit too excited there for a little bit with the big bounce off the bottom. I think we're going to go sideways for quite a while. Right. So I'm looking like next year pretty close to halving. So Bitcoin 2020 will be late March. Bitcoin 2019 is when we peaked at like 14K. So I'm kind of thinking Bitcoin 2020 will be the hallmark, like maybe break the all-time high right around there.
Yeah.
And then just off to the races. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm certainly in no rush for price action. I mean, I think a lot of us probably love the lower prices, especially if you're still accumulating.
For real. For real. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not in a rush.
No.
It's also nice to have time to like actually, build and work and not be just trying to deal with all this inbound attention. So
yeah, true. And it's also fun, like the dialogue on Twitter is, I mean, a couple months ago, right? Like last time under 10K and 28K incoming, like it's always price discussion. And there hasn't been a lot of that in the last month or two, which I like because it's more substantive, I guess, like the dialogue and the things that get talked about. And like you said, people just. Someone said this way long ago when I did an interview. I can't remember who, but basically the bear markets and the quiet times is when stuff gets done, right? Because people aren't thinking about their wealth going up and what they might do with their newfound riches and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man, your pods have been great. I've really been enjoying them.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, high quality stuff. How long have you been in this space? It sounds like you've been around for a while.
Well, long story short, I heard about it like before parity with the US dollar, right? And I remember that being a big hoopla. Heard about it through the Silk Road, was super interested in it as a social phenomenon, wasn't even looking at it in terms of an investment. And then got more involved in 2014, did my first Bitcoin related interview in 2015, and then whenever the opportunity arose, I would just do it as a hobby. Like if I came across a Bitcoiner, I'd sit down for a chat with them, which was pretty intermittent. Bobby Lee was my first in 2015, and then I traveled around last summer, and I went to the blockchain cruise, and I met a bunch of Bitcoiners there. But it was never like, it was always just like I thought this was super cool, what was going on, and I was super hopeful in it. And beyond that, like, I didn't really think about it. And then somehow I guess over time you follow enough people on Twitter that you end up realizing that Bitcoin Twitter is like an actual entity. And that happened for me like sometime spring this year, like, end of Q1, early Q2 this year. And I was like, I think I was probably a bit overzealous at first, because I was just like, holy shit, like I found my people. Like I didn't realize that everybody was, I knew there was a lot of Bitcoiners around the world, but I just didn't know they were hanging out in like, around the water cooler that is Twitter. And once I found it, I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. And, once I saw all these amazing people, I never got into like the Skype interviews before, because I always preferred like the face-to-face, like, in meet space conversations, because, they have a certain thing that you can't replicate over the airwaves. But, I'm in Thailand, and I really wanted to speak with these people and have these conversations, and just got more and more drawn into the space. And I was like, well, fuck it, I might as well make this a more formal endeavor. I've been doing it for ages, just kind of for fun. So why not just put a wrapper around it and make it a bit more of a formal thing? And it's been great, man. I mean, as you know, it's so awesome. Like every time before I have an interview,
it's so
I'm just
fun.
yeah, man, I'm so jazzed up. Like, before I have one, like, and I've said this before too, but I feel like I have a sense of guilt, just from 30 years or not 30 years, but like, let's say 15 years of working in jobs that like I don't love. Some of them I liked, some of them I hated, but nothing that like I loved. And when I like prepping for an interview, you read the guest articles or their output on Twitter, or you listen to previous interviews, that kind of stuff. And like I would do that anyways, and I love doing that. But because it's actually contributing to like work that I'm doing, I feel so like I have to actively not feel guilty about it, because it's like I feel like I'm slacking off, but I'm like, no. I need to be doing this. I'm supposed to be doing this now.
That's the goal, right? That's the goal. That's the dream.
Right. And so, and then the interview is great. And then, afterwards, shooting it around on Twitter a little bit is great too. And the feedback is surprising always, but of course it's nice. And, I'm preaching to the choir, I know, man, and this is supposed to be about you. So how'd you get into it?
Well, I mean, I fell into the rabbit hole like kind of late spring 2017. So like middle 2017. And I immediately I found Andreas Antonopoulos, and then I immediately found Vitalik Buterin and watched some of his stuff, and was sort of like taken by his whole shtick for a while.
Brady, sorry to interrupt. Just give me one second. I'm gonna switch over my Wi-Fi, because I'm getting quite a bit of a lag delay. So let me just. I might lose you, but I'll switch over. Still there? Still there?
Yep, still here.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, so you went down the rabbit hole, you found Andreas, but then you also found Vitalik. I think I know where this is going, but go for
it. Yeah. I mean, well, before that, I'd heard about Bitcoin for quite a while too. I was on Slashdot, and I heard about it on there. I set up a Coinbase account in 2014. I have a small regional bank, so I had trouble getting fiat to Coinbase and just kind of gave up on it. And then I saw it again when it broke the all-time high in 2017. And then it was a few months later that I saw an article about it again. I somehow found Andreas on YouTube and started watching that, and was like, holy shit, this is amazing. Like there's so much more going on here than I thought. I was just like sucked in down the rabbit hole. Then I found Vitalik, and like I said, was kind of sucked in by his shtick for a while. and Ethereum and that whole idea, the next Bitcoin, and of course the price of Ethereum was just going crazy. Um, and then the whole fork wars started in like August of that year, and I just didn't have quite enough, like I didn't have enough understanding to be really convicted about which way that was going to go, and I was just really scrambling trying to catch up with a bunch of Bitcoiners, and listening to Roger Ver and like reading r slash BTC and r slash Bitcoin, which was just a big like flame war going on. And I finally sort of figured things out. I wrote a blog post called, just for myself really, but I put it on Medium, Why Roger Ver is Wrong About Bitcoin Scaling. And that was kind of how I figured it out. So during that process, I had sort of hedged myself. So I had bought some Bitcoin Cash. So basically, I had roughly the same amount of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash in terms of like US dollar value, and kind of split it up. And I was like, all right, I'm one way or the other, I'm gonna be all right. And when I wrote that blog post, it was like middle of November, and it was like 2 weeks before the Ninja launch on Coinbase, right? They just like silently launched Bitcoin Cash on Coinbase, and it just went nuts. Like a couple days before Thanksgiving 2017, and I remember being in this kind of traders room on some discussion forum, and people were like, "Oh my God, this red candle is going to be epic," and it's just going up and up and up, and it almost reached parity with Bitcoin in terms of US dollars. And right around like $4,500, I sold it all, made a bunch of Bitcoin, and I was just super stoked about that. I was high on that for like 3 or 4 days, like, uh, and so it happened. The timing was perfect because I had just kind of arrived at this like, finally I had a little bit of conviction about what was happening, what was going on, enough understanding, and then I had been talking this whole time in my co-working space with a guy named Tommy. He's an older dude, really cool. And he saw me, he saw me with like a chart, looking at charts all the time. And I don't look at charts anymore, but back then I was definitely watching charts and getting all into TA and stuff, like you do. And so
Like you did.
like you do. So Tommy was really curious about what was going on, and I started talking about Bitcoin. So he and I just had more and more conversations. We have like a little happy hour every Thursday here, and we'd sit down and have a beer and talk Bitcoin every week. And so eventually we are like, all right, well, just, to help us learn as a forcing function for us to learn, let's just start recording our conversations. So in January 2018, Tommy and I just started recording our conversations. Every couple of weeks, we'd sit down and record a podcast. We put it on YouTube for a while, and that didn't really have any pickup, so we just started publishing it audio, and because it was easier to do. And so we did that all 2018. And then in 2019, I felt like I had enough of an understanding. I was really feeling confident. I had built up kind of this network on Bitcoin Twitter, kind of met a bunch of the Bitcoiners, and felt like, I could start interviewing them, like, kind of at least and have a decent conversation with these Bitcoiners and learn even more from them. So I started doing interviews. And I think my first one was Hodlonaut, actually. It was right around the lightning torch had just started, and so talked to him about the lightning torch thing, and it was off to the races from there. It's been awesome. I've been doing one a week since then, and I think Tommy and I did 20 episodes. We're at episode 54 now. Just recorded that with Gigi, so I've got about 34 interview episodes under my belt now. It's been amazing. Met a bunch of them, Bitcoiners in real life at Bitcoin 2019, which was an awesome experience. Highly recommend, like, if you're, okay with, the OPSEC risks that come with it. I think it's awesome to go out and meet Bitcoiners in real life. I learned a ton. Like I said, I mean, conviction went sky high after that. So yeah, that's the story, man. That's how we got into Bitcoin and started doing this podcast thing.
I was listening to the GG episode. Well, first of all, the one with Robert Breedlove was phenomenal, man. I know you got a lot of praise for that one. I think it's well deserved. It was just a great episode.
That was all Robert. Really.
Well, yeah, but mostly. But he needs a dance partner to get it all out properly.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I was listening to one with Gigi before, like earlier tonight. I only got about halfway through it, but it always amps me up listening to him, right? Because he's like, it's funny
Yeah.
because on Twitter versus, when you speak to him, you get a bit of a different vibe, right? Which is the case for
Right, right.
everybody. And on Twitter, like he's a hyper bull, sort of like,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, like a religious character as he often refers to. But yeah, super nice guy and just super and then hearing him describe like what happened in Riga and how he kind of went off the rails just with his bullishness and his like obsession with Bitcoin and everything. I loved it. I mean, just having. I know like a lot of us who do podcasts. I mean, there's a lot of overlap with speaking to the same people, right? And naturally, because
Right.
the space is only so big, but for some reason, like I never really tire of it. Like I'm a big consumer of podcasts myself, and just hearing, I mean, of course you'd love to hear other people that kind of reaffirm your own convictions, right? That's always nice, stroking your ego like, "Oh yeah, other people agree with me too." I'm not a crazy person. But just, hearing people talk about such a potentially revolutionary thing in such an informed, educated, convicted, passionate, clear, articulate, blah, 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 blah way is just
Yeah.
like, it's the coolest thing ever. The fact that we get to drop in and be a fly on a wall for these conversations with all these super cool people. And they're, very different, like united over Bitcoin and some of the qualities that Bitcoiners share, but, from all walks of life, all countries, colors and everything like that. I think it's such a compelling phenomenon. I guess that's why it pulls those of us that it pulls in.
Yeah, man. I've been calling it the dawn of the Bitcoin Renaissance for a while now, and
Makes sense.
that's kind of the brand that I've been going for Citizen Bitcoin. The logo is kind of this rising sun, and I want to have this sort of optimistic, sort of forward-looking vibe. And I think we're just so lucky to be here in this moment at the beginning of this, and be able to talk to all these people. I mean, these are the people who are going to be, future leaders and magistrates of the world, in a new Bitcoin world. And it's just amazing to get to know them and the network that we're building. The future is going to be absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And being here at the beginning is just kind of a special thing.
Yeah, I mean, I actually made a tweet about it today where I said something along the lines of like, if we're, and I usually like throw out this caveat when I start to get hyper bullish with certain guests, because I just want people to know if they're tuning in and they're not like hardcore Bitcoiners, like, yes, I understand like it might not work out, right? But let's
Yeah.
pause that for a second. Let's shelve that and just act as though we're right. And yeah, I mean, if if we're wrong, we'll be like looked at as well-meaning idealists, right? But if we're right,
Sure.
we've got front row seats for the most fantastic revolution of the human story.
Right.
Like, and I
Yeah.
don't, I say that and it doesn't even sink in, because how could it? We can't, it's really hard to see outside of the times that you're in, but like we're close enough to have an inkling of what that might be like. And again, like if our perception of this thing is correct, and if we're, I know there's luck involved and there's many different elements involved in whether or not this thing is ultimately successful. But if it is, man, being at being at the frontier of it, I mean, that's why we're here, because we probably both share this and everybody else in the space shares it. It's like, I just can't allow myself to be intellectually pulled in any other direction than this one, because it's the most compelling by far.
Oh yeah, by far. And it's, Trace Mayer says this a lot. It's attracting, our generations, several generations, the generations that are alive right now. It's attracting the polymaths of those generations, because it's just the most compelling intellectual challenge, and with the, you know, most incredible potential payoff, potential benefit to humanity.
Yeah.
And so how could you not want to be a part of that? Even, like you said, even if it doesn't happen, just, being a part of the discussions that I'm having learned about what money really is, getting to know these incredibly smart, amazing people, all worth it right there. Just all that worth it.
Totally.
And I don't think that, obviously I don't think we're wrong. And, it's important to stay humble, as Matt Odell always says, stay humble and stack your sats. And I think, I do think that's important, but I don't think that we're wrong at this point. My conviction is incredibly high. Understanding that Bitcoin is the killer app of the internet. This is, I think the reason that the internet, or like the most important, reason that the internet exists. And, I just turned 40 this year. So I'm like, on the older end of the millennials, younger end of Generation X, kind of that crossover generation. And I have been on the internet since I was about, probably about 10 years old. We had our first computer. I was running a BBS, a dial-up BBS. I had a friend who was at a local university, and he gave me his sign-on for their network, and so I was able to actually get onto the internet itself and start using chat and stuff, Usenet, all that stuff, and it just kind of went on from there. I got to witness as a child and teenager the birth of the internet. And it's happening all over again now, being able to witness it as an adult with all that experience under my belt professionally and just, personally, to be able to appreciate it that much more about what's happening here. And I think when you combine those network effects of the internet and the network effects of money, I think it's unstoppable at this point. Yeah. I think it's, inevitable that it will become the native currency, the native money of the internet. Whether or not it becomes the global reserve currency or whatever, I think is less certain. But Bitcoin is here to stay and will have a major part to play in the future of humanity. So
yeah, and I totally agree. So like I said, I throw out those caveats just so because I always hate when I'm listening to people that don't seem to appreciate the counter argument, even if they're even if they're crazy bullish. So I want to be crazy bullish, but to kind of enhance my credibility, I want the detractors that might be listening to know, like, I get the argument against, like, I really get it.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying I'm bullish despite that argument,
Absolutely. Yeah. We could be wrong. And I think being confident and convicted is fine.
Sure.
People say like strong opinions weakly held. I'm moving more towards what like Bitstein said on our interview a few weeks ago, like strong opinions strongly held, and people just kind of react to that and rightfully so in some sense, because we could all be wrong and it seems arrogant. But once you've studied this week in, week out for a couple of years, and you're been consumed by it completely, it just becomes apparent that it's going to happen. So.
Yeah. And I think the assessment of it being right or wrong is probably the wrong language to use on it, because the things that would undo it aren't the things that we're looking out and saying, determining whether it's right or wrong. Like the tech wise and the community wise and the network wise and the people that are involved in this, that all is pretty much unequivocally bomb. That's bomb.
Yeah, it's bomb.
But there are X factors that are often mentioned, like state intervention and this and that may slow it down, kill it. We don't know. Everyone is just kind of a little bit conservative with their wording for those reasons of the unknown factors. But yeah, I mean, anybody who's listening to this pod right now is probably yeah, fuck all that shit. This shit is definitely gonna work. We're all right, and that's just the way it is. But to your point about, did you say it was Trey saying that the polymaths are coming to this? Gigi actually talks about that as well. I think in one of his, his work, I don't know if it was an article or part of his website, but just the fact that the gravity of Bitcoin is starting to pull on so many different elements of society and industries and types of people. And I'll be honest, when I got into it, I was just it's clear that the state having total control over the creation and the distribution of money is a societal ill, or an ill for humanity. That much is clear. And if this thing represents the possibility of a viable alternative, it's valuable in my book. But at this stage, that's still probably goal number one. That's still probably the main value prop. But it's just amazing to see how this phenomenon is changing people, you know, and we're obviously just at the tip of the iceberg on that. And actually, I heard you speak about it way back on several podcasts when I think you were explaining the genesis of the name Citizen Bitcoin, and you were kind of articulating that like you wanted to represent or explore kind of the different attributes, characteristics, personalities that compose someone who's like a citizen of the Bitcoin economy or the Bitcoin world. And these are starting to become, I mean, again, like whether it's carnivory or whether it's low time preference stuff, like not everybody adheres to that, of course, but just the fact that people can now see that it does have an impact on behavior beyond just having another secure store of value. And I think this is where, you know, the religious sort of terminology starts coming out, because people kind of see how it's affected behavior and then they extract it out and say, well, if this is even more instrumental in society and people's lives, then presumably there'd be kind of a multiplier effect on its impact on people's behavior. And I think a lot of people like Gigi and Haas and other people are starting to see like, yeah, this could be more than just a better currency, you know?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, the follow-on effects of adjusting your time preference that is, you know, basically inspired by Bitcoin, by hard money, are profound. And if you look at, you know, history, the eras where we've been able to sustain the, you know, relative hardness of gold and not debase it, we've had incredible progress, and people have been able to pursue their dreams, basically what inspires them the most. So we had a renaissance the first time around, and you know, I said earlier that, you know, maybe whether or not, you know, Bitcoin becomes the global reserve currency, et cetera, is more debatable. I don't think it's debatable in the long run, because the economic truth of hard money will assert itself. I am uncertain how fast that will happen, because I do think that the state has a lot of power and the central banks have a lot of power to exert, and you know, it'll happen in the long run. I'm just not sure exactly how fast it'll happen. I think the Bitcoin will become the native money of the internet very quickly, and you know, all of e-commerce will get sucked up into that black hole very quickly. I think it'll happen in the next 10 years, almost for certain. And then we'll see how long states can resist. But eventually, you know, those fiat monies will hyperinflate, and the conceit that humans can manage money better than, you know, this sort of natural or very simple system, this very simple monetary supply that Bitcoin has, is going to be proven absolutely insane and incorrect. And yeah, so we'll be kind of freed from that conceit that has, you know, spread all over the world. We're living in this Keynesian age. This is the age of Keynesian cultists, and they have pursued and stuck to these falsehoods and you know, I guess forced them on the rest of the world. And that's, I mean, it's one of the greatest thefts in human history. I mean, you know, money has been debased for a long time, but the scale at which it's happened now is just unmatched in history. You know, mainly because we're at a different phase in history. You know, we have a global society, so it's easier for that to happen at this scale. So yeah, I think we're going to see people change. I have changed already. At this point, I am much more likely to save. I'm more thoughtful about my future, about my family's future. I'm more productive. I'm healthier. I'm more disciplined. And all of those things make me a better person in general, right? I respect myself more because of all of those sort of values that have been instilled simply by the truth of hard money. Right?
Yeah. Can we dig into this for a second? Because like
Yeah,
I'm super fascinated by, and look, like some of those things that you mentioned, like I've always been super frugal, for example. So it hasn't changed like my frugality that much, let's say. And I've always been kind of a minimalist. Like, I have two pairs of shirts, two pairs of shorts, a pair of jeans. Like that's pretty much all the clothes I have in the world. So, but
Yep.
to the other things that you've mentioned, thinking about future and family and planning, and it's almost like, and I want, let's dig into this on this together, but like somehow it draws, and I hate to use this term because it's very like woo woo new age, so fill in whatever is a more appropriate term, but like it's almost like interacting with this thing draws your like higher self, or a better version of yourself, or a more optimized perception of your potential out of yourself. And why the
Right.
fuck is that? What's going on there? Is it just because you want to save because you think it's like you'll have more money in the future if you sacrifice a present? It seems like it's more than that.
I really think that that's what it is, but it's hard to understand how profound the follow-on effects of that very simple change is, right? And for me, like there are people that, despite living in this kind of fiat age, are still disciplined and, like you said, frugal and thoughtful and plan ahead and save and all of that. And I commend those people. I was not one of them. um, I had very high time preference. I would, yeah, I was living for experiences, and I spent a lot of money on experiences, which, to some degree are important. Like, for me growing up, it was really just kind of selfish experiences, just traveling, going out with friends, and doing it in a way that wasn't frugal, or wasn't really thoughtful about how I spent my money. I am mindful of, with my children and my family, that, that time really goes very quickly. Your kids are really only kids for about 10 years, and then it preteen and teen, and then they're sort of off on their own, making their own way, spending a lot of time with their friends and stuff. So the time that you really get to be a full-time parent, where your kids are, you know, really just look to you for guidance and nurturing and all of that, lasts a very short time. So I am mindful of that, and that is, I think, a driver of time preference, and one of the reasons why, the argument that we're going to get in some deflationary spiral is absolute crap, because we all have limited amount of time, right? Our time is the most scarce asset that we have until Bitcoin. And, Bitcoin can kind of match that, get close to that. And eventually, maybe when it's infinite stock to flow in 2140 and beyond, will become infinitely scarce, just like a time for us. And so, yeah, I was more of a high time preference person. There's just my nature. And I absolutely see the change that it's made in me. And it's really simply that, with fiat, I can do that economic calculation too, right? Like, I can borrow money at a certain rate. I can play the credit card game. I can, figure out ways to, have 0%, borrow money at 0%, pay it back in a certain amount of time or whatever. I can play that game. But it's incentivized to spend, because that money is decreasing in value. You want to get it out of your pocket. You want to, or invest, in something that is more scarce than the fiat itself. So I just I had some investments, but, not as much. I don't know. It's just the way that my nature. And I think that there are a lot of people out there like me, that, will change when Bitcoin sort of, inspires them, through just the very simple truth of hard money, to save a bit more, invest a bit more, think a little bit longer term. And that just kind of piles up and piles up and creates a society that is thinking more along those lines. And then you get, beautiful projects that are, long-term thinking, huge, beautiful architecture, amazing art, like just incredible, like feats of engineering. And we've seen that in the past. So I think we can look forward to that in the future too.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the central points, about people having, the calmness and the clarity of mind and the confidence to put a large amount of work into something over a long period of time. So this quality over quantity sort of thing, that, you know, this, I guess, reversion from expediency, because, and this is maybe, this was what I was thinking, how it's impact me the most, is just, I think, by virtue of, and I think a lot of this is subconscious. Like, I don't think people are walking around with fiat in their pocket, like, I got to spend this before it's worthless. You know, it's just, I think the underlying monetary standard of a civilization or a culture just, you know, is very insidious, and it impacts behavior in a variety of ways. And I think with something like Bitcoin, where before there might have been an anxiety about the future, like an uncertainty, like, I don't know if it's going to pan out, and that anxiety caused you, you know, well, you lacked clarity of mind, you lacked calmness, and that just caused you to operate in a way that favored expediency, right? Because it was more easy to establish certainty on a short time frame than a long time frame. Like, I can just manage now or next year or the next couple of years, and I'll go year by year. But I think once you have that kind of, you know, that thing way off in the future that's pulling you forward, and that in which you can have a high degree of confidence, I think it bestows, or at least allows you to access a calmness, and you're just like, okay, you know, now my time and money is not slipping through my hands like sand. You know, I have something in the future that I can rely on. Okay. Now that that's the case, what is most important? What is most meaningful? What is the best way to approach the work that I want to do? And I think that's why in previous examples, you got like that famous architecture and those famous art, because like they had a confidence and a calmness that allowed them to just fully commit to the highest expression of their work that they were capable of. Not the most expedient, not not the, you know, the get rich quick, not the just get it done for the paycheck, but, you know, what is my highest capability in this domain? How do I express that? And I somehow, through, you know, even that was, you know, that doesn't do it justice, but somehow that that confidence that in the future they'll, you know, their time or their resources will be available to them, will be accessible.
Yeah. It's the ability to run a 50-year project.
Right.
You know?
Right.
I mean, in 50 years, fiat will inflate to the point where, you know, the purchasing power is extremely low, you know, compared to what it was, you know, 50 years before that. And if you look at like what the economy that fiat has produced for most people, right? I'm not talking about very rich people or even the upper 10%, because those people will have access to invest their fiat into scarce assets, you know, equities, houses, condos, art, things like that, right? And that will hold value more than the fiat. And that's what they do. All of those have monetary premiums on them now that Bitcoin will suck away. But most people are living paycheck to paycheck at this point. If you look at WTF happened in 1971.com, which was made by Colin and Ben at the Bitcoin Echo Chamber podcast, Ben Prentice and Colin. And it's just really a collection of all of these graphs that show an inflection point very clearly in 1971. And one of the most important is you've seen productivity and wages rise, you know, basically in tandem. Until 1971, they split. Wages went basically flat. Productivity continued to rise. So essentially, it's a way to steal from people's productivity, people's time, right? And that means that, you know, you have to basically, if your wages are flat, mean wages are flat, most people aren't able to make enough money to maintain their standard of living. The standard of living just keeps going down over time. You know, my grocery bills are far higher now than even I remember when I started buying my own groceries 20 years ago. Like I can't go to the grocery store without spending $100 almost, right. You know, every time. I fill up a couple bags and I'm like, what the hell? This is $100 for all this, you know? Meat is super expensive, milk, eggs, you know, crazy expensive for all that stuff compared to just 20 years ago. If you go back to 1971, it's even crazier. So it's theft, it's time theft. And it is hard for most people to those investments are inaccessible just because you're living paycheck to paycheck, and so you really have no way to store your wealth. You're just trying to get by, and it's insidious, like you said. It's money is, as Ron Paul says, half of every human interaction, every economic interaction. Money is one half of that, and then a good or service is on the other side. So yeah, it's affecting every human interaction, every economic human interaction, with kind of in a way that you can't really see on a day-to-day basis. It takes decades, and if you're not studying this stuff because you're worried about surviving paycheck to paycheck, then you just don't realize it's happening. I think Bitcoin is this real world instantiation of that will show people what money really is. You can intellectually think about it. You can listen to a politician talk about it. And Ron Paul says, audit the Fed. They're stealing from you. But it's hard to really understand that without having an example to the counterpoint, right? And that's what Bitcoin is. It's waking us all up.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And that's, the kind of the issue that the Austrians ran into, right? It's like, in their writings, whether they wanted to create private bank competing currencies, whether they were backed by gold or a basket of commodities and this kind of stuff. And it was like, maybe those would have been better temporarily, right? But you'd always just default back to the same issues. There would be a concentration of power, of custodians, third party, this, like even, the market dynamic of all these competing currencies just wouldn't have been enough to overcome perhaps that natural human inclination toward comfort and concentration and delegation of responsibility in return for a perceived level of security, right? And so as a result, it kind of manifested this fiat system at the apex of that behavior. And as it happens, something like Bitcoin emerges on the world to not only force the issue and kind of like, and that's what Bitcoin is doing, but like you said, to kind of hold up the mirror, to put pressure on this, to kind of, or not the mirror, but to kind of shine a light on how all this actually works and the effects that it has on damn near every aspect of society, because it is the fundamental component. It is the money. Like you said, it's half of every transaction. So how could it not touch and affect pretty much society on every level and everybody in it?
Right.
And that's the kind of the weird elements of our times right now, because if we are kind of in the later stages of this fiat money experiment, and some would argue we're not, but if we say that we are in the later stages of that, you would expect to see a lot of different manifestations of the imbalances that it has created, right? And I think we're starting to see that, or not starting, but I think maybe we're mid-game somewhere, but we're seeing all these social manifestations of and people identifying problems, and in my opinion wrongly attributing causes, but we're seeing that all over. There's unrest and disruption happening everywhere, and I think most of us Bitcoiners would probably say that it's because of the money and Bitcoin fixes this, but not very many people see it that way at the moment.
Yeah, and more will. This fiat experiment, the gold bugs have been, kind of yelling this for a long time. And Ron Paul really had the kind of loudest voice, or made the most impact on kind of at least the U.S. stage, and maybe even the world stage, about, decrying what was happening here. And I think there's been, many times where gold bugs have called for, here's the big crack up boom, as Austrians call it, right? And been calling for that for decades, really.
Yeah.
So, who knows how much longer these central banks can kind of pull a rabbit out of a hat and keep things going and keep this charade going. But, we are sort of at an extreme. We are an extreme that has never been reached before. Negative interest rates all over the place. Like you said, instability, political unrest and economic instability all over the world. And now we have another thing that's very different, is we have Bitcoin. We have, like I said, this instantiation of the alternative, which has not existed before. So, Bitcoin hasn't been through an economic a recession or a collapse. It was born out of the 2008 financial collapse, and it hasn't really, it was didn't even have a U.S. dollar a price equivalent or whatever a trade value for almost a couple of years. So, and by that point, we had sort of printed our way out of quantitatively eased, whatever the hell that means. It means money printing, out of that problem. So Bitcoin hasn't been through an economic crisis yet, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens because there is one on the horizon. It may be next year, maybe a few years away. It will come. Um, so whether or not Bitcoin is seen as, a safe haven asset or it's seen as too risky and gets dumped is yet to be seen. I think it will depend a lot on education, podcasts like this, and all the kinds of the writing that's been put out, Bitcoin Twitter, just Bitcoiners being hired by Bitcoin, by the incentives in the network to educate other people, new coiners, about what's going on. I think if we get a critical mass, and we also see politicians who are pro Bitcoin popping up in the United States Congress, and I'm sure in other parts of the world too. I think if we get a critical mass there, we'll be able to basically convince enough people that Bitcoin is where you should put your money in a very economically and politically risky time because it's a safe store of value, and I think we're about there. I think we're getting there. So we'll see what happens. I think in a couple of years, a couple more years of this education and talking about this on mainstream media and all, and the alternative media, channels out there, that we'll get a critical mass and be able to convince people that that's what they should do with their money at that time. So
yeah, I mean, obviously I'm in favor of talking about this stuff, and educating people is a bit strong because I don't see myself that way. I realize that that may be the effect some of the time, but just exposure to these ideas, exposure to this technology, this way of thinking, all that kind of stuff. But as you were saying that, and I always think about like how it's going to play out. Of course nobody knows, but I think the mainstream will react to the dominant narrative, right? So maybe at the next crisis they won't dump, because if they recognize that fiat is the problem, then I think Bitcoin has a good chance of going up in a crisis rather than down, right? But I saw I think, I don't know if it was Marty Bent or somebody shared on Twitter like 5 minutes before I came on here, that Mark Carney was basically saying that climate change is the reason for the current, kind of financial woes, and it's definitely something that's going to be really tough to combat, and we all need to gather together and blah blah blah. So basically, scapegoating, the problems of the current system on this big issue that a big portion of the world is behind. And if that's the case, if the narrative for the collapse of the system is not in what I would deem the truth, i.e. the current monetary standard and fiat money and that kind of stuff, but if it's scapegoated to something else, then that could mean that during the next collapse, the real culprit is not caught, and that would be maybe bad for Bitcoin. Now the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, like it's not all good or all bad, but it is interesting, and critical even, how the narratives that play out and how that affects people's behavior. And to that extent, what we do and what other people in the space do, I think is, and even to, people in their private lives, the conversations they have with friends and family and people they meet is actually critically important, because it's just with every podcast download, with every person you talk to, with every person you sit next to on the plane or whatever, like, yeah, it's that, these types of thoughts are seeping through. And it's just more food for thought. And like you said, at some point there's a critical mass, or at least that's the hope. It won't happen if we've got to get to some critical mass, whatever that is. We don't know, right? But I think, and I've been on this kind of kick, for a little while now, and I just think I get privacy and OPSEC and all that kind of stuff, and I think you have to find what you're comfortable with and do it the best that you can. But I think there's a bit of a disconnect between wanting this to go mainstream and, it to become the world reserve currency, but simultaneously telling everybody like, well, don't tell anybody you have any because, could be problems. It's like, well, how's it going to be, something for everybody if nobody is going to say that they have any? But more than that is, I just think people, and I've said this a bit, so I'll be quick, but I think people respond to enthusiasm, and they respond to emotion.
Yeah.
It doesn't negate the fact that you have to articulate yourself well and be informed and knowledgeable. But if you can combine those two, and I think that's why Andreas has been such a great, advocate for the community, and he's been so popular, is because obviously he's a great speaker. He's articulate. He knows what he's talking about. And he's passionate about it. Now, I know he's received some criticism lately for some things, but, my point is just that if, people respond to emotion, and we're seeing people respond to emotion around the world today in a lot of bad ways, like people getting riled up for, perhaps without the requisite data and information behind those emotions. But if you can bring both to the table, like if you can really be rational and logical and informed and project emotion, enthusiasm, in some capacity, not overdo it, of course. I think that's I don't know. I think that's good. I think that's probably the route that I'll take.
Yeah, I think it's successful too. And it's certainly the vibe of the Citizen Bitcoin podcast. It's optimistic, forward-looking, enthusiastic, etc. And I agree with you on that front. I think on the privacy question, the question about, the sort of conflict between, hey, we want this to become mainstream and money for the people, but, you shouldn't tell anybody that you have some. I think that comes out of a time where, and Matt Odell talked about this on our episode, which was quite a while ago now, but it was a great one. One of the things he said was that the OPSEC and the sort of devotion to privacy and OPSEC really comes out of the early days of Bitcoin, the first 4 or 5 years, when Bitcoiners were extremely devoted to teaching each other about how to do this privately and how to be anonymous and maintain your OPSEC, because everyone thought at that point that the government was just going to ban it and crack down. And Bitcoin was able to be traced to you in some way, shape, or form, that you might get, at least have it confiscated, your wealth confiscated, or maybe even worse, thrown in jail or taken to court or whatever. And of course, the state, there's very good reason to fear the state. Even in a country like the United States, which is, more free than most, it's still the U.S. will still, look what they did to Ross. 2+ years with no chance of parole, and he's already lost his appeal. So it's just barbarous, really, what they've done to him. It's cruel and unusual, and they made an example of him because of Bitcoin. There were similar crimes that were committed, similar in the sense that people were enabling the purchase of drugs or weapons or whatever, and didn't get anywhere close to that kind of a sentence, right?
Yeah, I heard Trey Mayer on somebody's podcast. I was out on a run today and I was listening to it. Can't remember if it was Stefan or not sure, but anyways, he brought up Ross, and it just broke my heart, because he was like, look, he had a double life sentence, and he lost his appeal. And he actually said, like, everyone passing around this petition and stuff, it's a waste of time. He's not getting out, period. It's done. And I was just
unless there's a presidential pardon, right?
Right.
And last chance.
I mean, I was like, when he said that, I was just like, oh, that's fucking heavy as shit. But also, I mean, you got to keep faith. I mean, you can't not keep faith, especially, if you're Ross. You got to keep out hope. And who knows how the fuck the world might change in 40 years, like a lot of weird stuff can happen. But yeah, that was just that's such a goddamn shame.
Yeah, and I think that's where the devotion to OPSEC comes from, right? And it's still there. So I think there's going to be this sort of transition where the early Bitcoiners who are devoted to being anonymous and maintaining operational security, and will sort of transition into more people who are willing to be public. Matt himself came out and doxed himself because he believed that he could, do more good for Bitcoin by being a public educator. So I think more and more people will choose that path, and we'll have a gradual transition. I think there will always be people who decide to remain anonymous, and that's great. We need both people. I mean, both kinds of people. It's important for people to understand the importance of privacy. That's another thing that Bitcoin has, changed for me. I had resigned the to a world of radical transparency, and that's just the way things were going to be. After the Snowden documents were released, and I just read his book, by the way. It's amazing, and every Bitcoiner should get his book, Permanent Record, and listen to it or read it. After that, I was like, oh well, look, they're already doing it. It's here, and it's still. I mean, they're probably still doing it, despite the fact that they're not supposed to be. And Bitcoin gives me some hope that the mass sort of distribution of cryptographic technology will help us, maintain some privacy. And I think it's important for anonymous Bitcoiners to, continue to be anonymous and continue to preach privacy and the importance of privacy. There's a lot of people most people out there, I think, are still of the mind like, what do I have to hide? I don't need privacy. I don't have anything to hide. I'm not a criminal.
Yeah.
And that's just a wrong way to think about privacy. Humans, all of those people still, close the door when they take a dump. You know what I mean? Like or when they're, making love, all kinds of things. People, we all wear clothes and stuff like that. Like humans need some level of privacy in our lives. We're not built or made or evolved to have this, kind of radical transparency for the most part, right? So yeah, it's just the wrong way to think about privacy. And I think Bitcoin will also teach people the importance of privacy. And I think that's important.
And I totally agree. And when I say the kind of inherent opposition between, wanting mainstream adoption but preaching privacy, like I'm not, it's just kind of one of those funny things, but I totally agree that Bitcoin does cause people to consider their privacy more, and that's a good thing, and that they should, and then you get to determine, and it's not, it's not even always about privacy, but it will probably come down in the future to just being in control of your data and your information, so, you may choose to be a very transparent individual, you may choose to be very open and whatever in the digital realm, but just knowing that you control the faucet of the data and where it goes, and if there's anything to be gained from it, like if it's being monetized or sold in some way, then you are privy and party to that. I think that is really, probably what the future is going to look like. But I agree, and Bitcoin, and it's part of the, the kind of way that Bitcoin inspires people to consider so many different elements of their life more, but particularly in the privacy and financial realm, because this argument comes up a lot where people say, like, not everybody's going to control their own, keys, and, there's still going to be banks and custodians and all this kind of stuff. And like, I don't know where I fall on that. I know a lot of people are just so far away from taking that responsibility and so ingrained in the existing way of doing things. But I mean, that's what this thing is about, right? It's really taking that for yourself and being in control one way or the other, and taking responsibility for, the security or for the loss if that occurs. And I know that's super scary. And like we were saying earlier with just there may be an innate desire for comfort, and this is one of the elements that causes the concentration of power, because we all delegate responsibility and sovereignty in exchange for comfort and the perception of security, and this creates structures in which power concentrates, and that's a big thing to overcome. It may be overcoming our very nature, and we may never have had a tool that allows us to do that, but Bitcoin is that tool. And so it's fundamentally challenging deeply ingrained behaviors, if that is true. And so that's a pretty big hill to climb. And for that reason, I think it is good that people preach privacy and talk about these considerations, because it brings them to awareness, and then obviously helps people manage them if they choose to. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
Yeah, I think no, I think on the question about whether or not we can expect people to hold their own keys in the future, that maybe that idea seems a bit far-fetched because it's not convenient. I think that's going to be basically solved by UX design technology. And I mean, I look at Casa, right? Casa, I have a Casa node, and their multi-sig product is fantastic. It's seedless, all right? So you don't have to worry about storing your seed somewhere in a bank vault or in a safe in your house or anything like that. It's a 2 of 3 for the basic multi-sig, the gold level. It's 2 of 3. If you lose one of the keys, Casa can rotate it out for you. You can actually do that yourself. You can rotate it out and establish it, or reestablish it basically with a new key. So that helps a ton. And the user experience on it is amazing. It's super simple, and it'll get better and better. Sats app that they provide as well is an extremely simple UX for sending and receiving Bitcoin on Lightning or Bitcoin on chain. So we're seeing really rapid development on that front, and I think that's sort of where the future is seedless multi-sig for the average user. So I'm not so worried about that, and the kind of plug and play nodes, that development. I mean, we're still at the really early stage of that. You could figure. I think that will be, something like we have like a cable box or a PlayStation or even your router. It'll just be a box that you plug in, and you can, verify the ledger yourself, and you can attach it to your multi-sig so that it uses your own node to verify what's going on. And that'll all be very easy, very simple. And there'll be services like Casa that will be there to hold your hand, and make sure that you are doing it right and you feel comfortable about what's going on. So I'm not too worried about that. I think as far as another thing that's really cool on the privacy front and like the personal responsibility front and owning your own data, owning your own wealth, is that Bitcoin has inspired the development of technologies like Blockstack, right? And I think there will be, other technologies that are similar, basically that allow you to own your own data and parcel it out to services as you wish, and then pull it back without leaving a copy on some centralized party's server, right? Right now, our data is just everywhere, and it propagates everywhere, and copies of it are everywhere. And it's, as the title of Snowden's book says, it's part of the permanent record at this point. It's not going to go anywhere. It's like Bitcoin's ledger. It's been copied at this point. So the idea of owning your own wealth will lead to the idea of owning your own data and the ability to do both of those things. And we're moving toward a world that's toward a sovereign individual world where you're able to, control your life. And that's profound in a digital age. So.
Totally, man. Like a lot of things came to my mind when you were just saying that, but the first one was, as once all this keeps being developed, and at some point it just becomes de facto status quo, right? Can you imagine a young child emerging in the world when they have de facto financial sovereignty, data privacy, like just all of those things? What kind of a feeling of empowerment that'll be, like, because
yes.
Right now, and you referenced the term sovereign individual. Right now, most individuals are just like a compendium of dependent relationships, and that's a very powerless feeling. It must be, and again, I think it's probably subconscious, but subconsciously, we all probably know that we're dependent on our bank to access our money, and we're dependent on the central bank and the government for the value of our money, and we're dependent on the grocery store for our food, and we're dependent on the energy company and the grid for our electricity, and we're dependent. And so what is the individual now? It's certainly not sovereign. It's it's a bunch of dependent relationships, each of which could be withdrawn at any moment without any of your say or control or consent.
Yes.
That is the antithesis of sovereignty, and that's certainly a powerless feeling. I can feel it when I'm saying it, but I can also
Yes.
feel when I imagine the reverse of that, where each one of those things, where you've severed the relationship of dependence and you've established control for yourself. Like, man, it's welling up inside of me. Like, it's a strength
Yeah.
and a very empowering feeling. And just to know that that is on the horizon, and to know even further than that, that people will emerge in the world and that will be what they have access to from the get. Man, like,
Yeah.
that's worth fighting
I mean,
for, man. That is worth fighting for.
absolutely, man. Yeah, man, I hear that, and I'm feeling it too, and it's inspiring and directing us toward Bitcoin is inspiring and directing us toward a more decentralized world in general, which is much more anti-fragile, right? Right now we have this, like you said, centralized systems where we're dependent on so many things that are utterly vulnerable to black swan events, right?
Right.
At every level. So I think in the future we'll see, these kind of decentralized political experiments, as Michael Goldstein put it on our episode. He talked about a Bitcoin future being this sort of decentralized regions of a political experimentation where you can just sort of go where you are sort of drawn to, like the way you want to live. Those options will be all over the world, and because there's a you know, diversity of ways that people are living, humanity is more like resilient to and anti-fragile to these kind of black swan events, right? And that's where we're going. And the first stage of that is, I would argue like the early internet was that was the ideal, right? The decentralization of information, right? Then make it available to everyone, so it's not so centralized, right? It's like the Library of Alexandria moment for everyone, and that's a wonderful thing. But the internet has also been increasingly centralized since then, right? And we're all dependent on a single ISP, right? I mean, or maybe there's 2 or 3 available where you are, but there's a tiny, just a very few number, right? But we're heading to a world where there's going to be these mesh networks that we can tie into, and completely route around any centralization whatsoever, right? There's examples at every level, and Bitcoin is the inspiration for that world, for that future, and the example. Yeah.
100%, man. It's exciting shit.
Yeah, it is. Hell yeah.
Because I used to, and I still do, I occasionally come across the mainstream news media. I try to avoid it. I don't like watch TV or anything, but on Twitter and stuff like that, you come across it. And one of the things that always got me down was, I've always been maybe, like an eternal optimist despite, more rational considerations, I guess you would say, but at least hopeful. And but seeing the manner in which people were behaving, and just the way people thought and acted, like I always thought to myself, how does this get turned around? Like, this is a generational, and I'm like, the ship's not even beginning to turn around, so presumably it's going to get worse. But like, this is from the time you're a kid and the education you get and the environment you're raised in, and like, this is all very, very big stuff that has a momentum to it that I didn't see how that could get turned around. And the real answer is probably still, like, for some it's not. Not everybody can be saved, unfortunately. That's probably going to be the case. But at least I think there's this thing out there that's compelling people to wake up a little bit and to realize, for lack of a more all-encompassing term, kind of realize the ramifications of their behavior and the relationships in their life with people and with entities and inanimate objects, for example, and just hopefully start to chip away at that, And I think we were talking behavior change at the beginning of the hour, and then I just articulating how kind of like exciting it made me feel just to be articulating what kind of a world it would be like when all those dependencies were removed and people had, the power themselves in all of those different capacities and realms. I think that's what's happening with us Bitcoiners in the space. Like, and we're still all dependent as fuck, right, on everything, on food and electricity and banking and everything. But we can smell it, like we can smell it, and we can fast forward ahead and see a little bit further. And I think we're all starting to feel that power. And of course, sometimes it flares off in toxicity or bravado or overconfidence or whatever. But I think I feel like we're all being tickled with this sovereignty thing, and it's such early days, but
tickled with sovereignty.
but we feel the power coming. It certainly seems like that to me.
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, that's why we're so excited, right? I mean, that's why that's what we're talking about here, and why we're spending our time on this, and why we are so jazzed on this episode. I mean, it's you're right. There's an inkling. There's a little tickle. There's a little feeling like in our guts, that this is happening. There's a chance here. That's why I was so. It turned me around on the idea of privacy. I was resigned to this feeling of I'm going to be watched all the time, and that's just the way it's going to be. And I think about all the cameras in my home and the microphones, and I sacrificed. I admit, almost all of us have my privacy for convenience, for access to information, for access to entertainment, all that stuff. And what we have to do, and humans are going to do that. Humans want to be entertained. Humans want to have access to information. Like we want knowledge. We want communication with other humans. We want all that stuff. So what we have to do is build the technology in a way where we preserve privacy and sovereignty while allowing for all of those technologies to persist, right? And I think that's what we're on the precipice of doing. And this is just the beginning. It's going to be a long process. And when most Bitcoiners talk about how this is a marathon, not a sprint, I agree completely that that's the way it is for Bitcoin too. But for me, the larger marathon is the promise of the world that Bitcoin is going to provide for us and inspire for us and incentivize the building of. That's the long game, right? And I'm thinking about my kids and my grandkids and the kind of future that I want them to have. My kids know about Bitcoin. We have the Bitcoin Rabbi's book, and we read it. My son loves it. He talks about Satoshi all the time. Like we do the node heartbeat together.
That must be so cool.
Yeah, he's 4.5 years old. We do the node heartbeat together every morning. He's like, Dad, did we get the Satoshis this week? And I'm like, I tried to tell him the other day that we call them Sats for short. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I like Satoshis better. I'm going to call them Satoshis. All right. And he knows that we have like this better money. And he asks me like, how are things going with Bitcoin? Did you work on Bitcoin today? What's going on?
Your heart must explode, man. That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, they know all about it. I talk about on the podcast this idea of default Keynesians so I've kind of thought about this a bit more, and I've kind of separated it out. There's Keynesian cultists who know what they're doing, or maybe they just believe it, right? They've been, whatever, but they work toward this Keynesian world, toward establishing and perpetuating it. And then there's default Keynesians, who are people who have just sort of been, acculturated to this idea, and this is just the way things are. They're resigned to it, or they just don't even know, about the way money works. And so, because they don't have that knowledge or whatever, this is the way things are. The government controls the money. Well, we have a whole generation of default Bitcoiners being raised right now, and my daughter and my son, as they grow up and get older and start thinking about making money and what they want to do with their future, will have Bitcoin as a tool to use and also as an inspiration for the future, for a better future. And then when they have kids, if they have kids, imagine in it's 20, 30 years away for my kids. You can imagine the future that they'll be living in there, and we'll be well down the road toward what we've been talking about this whole episode, and that world. And then we'll hand it off to that generation, and they'll just keep building and building. And by the end of this century, we'll have a whole new world and it's starting right now. The Bitcoin was the seed of that future for us. I think we'll be, exploring the solar system. I think we'll be, pushing toward new technologies that will allow us to explore other solar systems. I think we'll be colonizing the moon and Mars and maybe even moons on Jupiter. I really want to see what the hell's under Io, the frozen moon of Jupiter. There's supposed to be a whole sea down there. It could be teeming with life. That would be incredible, right? So all of these sort of dreams of humanity, of science fiction that we've grown up with, I think will be incentivized to come true by Bitcoin, right? I mean, it not only inspires people to do and gives people the ability to do that, but it's also incentivized. I mean, it's the amazing ability of hard money is that it just incentivizes exploration and innovation and long-term thinking and these grand projects, and the realization of grand visions. So it's amazing.
God damn it. I got to try to sleep after this. I'm so fucking jacked up right now.
I know, right?
And you can feel free to pass on this question, but you brought up your kids, and like, is your spouse like privy to? I mean, of course she's privy to your Bitcoin stuff. Is she on board? Does she support it?
Yeah, she does. She does completely at this point. I remember when.
That's because she knows you got that 6.15. That's why.
That's right. Although I don't refer to her in that vulgar way, of course.
Of course.
No, in 2017, when I was, starting to gain conviction, I had some fiat that I put in, but I really wanted to make a bigger allocation to Bitcoin, bigger investment in Bitcoin. And so I wrote a 7-page memo to my wife about why we should invest more in Bitcoin. And I took her out to dinner, presented it to her. She asked me a bunch of questions. And the next morning she was like, all right, I'm in, let's do it. And then we kind of, we freed up some money from other investments and started allocating, just kind of dollar cost averaging in.
Sorry, when was this?
It made sense. What's that?
When did you take her out to dinner and have the whole explanation thing?
This was like 2018. It was when we, had like, she had already heard about Bitcoin, but when I had to like pitch her on making a larger investment, and after the all-time high, and we started going down, and I had like heard enough about sort of these cycles and how Bitcoin works. I've been looking at the long-term charts and all that stuff, and so I was like, well, now's the time to start thinking about putting more money in if we're going to do it. And so yeah, it was like early 2018. I pitched her on it, and then we started kind of scaling in as price went down. So
how was she steadfast in December 2018, or was she like coming at you with
I definitely got some shade. She's like, what the hell's going on? But what was cool was she then came back like a while later, and she actually did some reading on her own. I was like, here, this really helped me, have some conviction about this investment. And so she read like Internet of Money, a few chapters of the Internet of Money, and skimmed through the Bitcoin Standard. Like I picked out some chapters of that for her to read, and then a few weeks later, she was like, "What's the price of Bitcoin?" I was like, "Oh, it's dipped back down. It's like 3,000 or something." She's like, "Oh man, we got to buy more. $3,000. This is the time. This is the time we got to buy more."
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was good stuff. Like she's definitely in now, and just excited about the success of the podcast and the future that Bitcoin promises. She's all in. So
God damn it, that's dope, man. That's awesome.
We're a Bitcoin family at this point.
That is so sick. Yeah, I'll reiterate this again. I think I mentioned it once or twice already, but Brandon Quidden, when I was talking to him, he was like, and I think he said it a bunch elsewhere. We need, people have been talking about Bitcoin generally, mostly. You've got, the Bitcoin Rabbi in his book, and it's starting to kind of like bifurcate to like more niche categories. But like Someone's got to write the Bitcoin for Moms book, like
Yeah.
how many
Yeah.
how many dude Bitcoiners are out there with their spouse that like doesn't really get it, but like someone needs to write the book for that particular audience. And Brandon's point was like we all have different perspectives and are at different stages in life and have different interests and that kind of stuff. And people need to be instead of just coming at everyone like this is Bitcoin, you come at vegans with Bitcoin and moms for Bitcoin and grandparents and like everything, because the way that you articulate it will be somewhat different, right? You'll use different examples
Yeah,
to
yeah.
relate and stuff like that. So I like that idea, Bitcoin for moms. Somebody's got to take that and run with it.
I like it too.
Maybe you should. You're
Seems
the
like
one with all the experience.
maybe it sounds like something Alex Edelman and Lolly should do. Like I think that's gonna those kinds of apps are going to expose a lot of new people. And just I don't want to stereotype, but I think it's at least true in my life that my wife does the majority of the shopping for us. Like
Sure,
I go to the
sure.
grocery store and stuff, but like like buying the stuff off the internet, off Amazon or whatever, like she does all that stuff for us. And she's really good at it. She finds deals. She knows how to save money while you're shopping, all that stuff. And so I've got her hooked up with Lolly now, and we've also been working with Fold, and both of those apps are amazing. Like you can stack sats like crazy,
So
and it's
jealous.
not that hard. It's not that hard, man. Like you buy a $100 Amazon gift card, instead of just like checking out on your debit card, all you gotta do is buy this. It's maybe an extra minute. Buy an Amazon gift card, stack your sats, then make your purchase. Right.
Does she
So
love it?
yeah,
Does your wife love it?
yeah. I mean, it's like she loves finding deals, and
Right.
so it's a deal. This is like a way for
The
she thinks
deal of
I
the
think she kind of
century.
thinks about
Holy
it.
shit.
No
I mean,
shit.
come
Like
on.
it's like contributing to our retirement savings basically every time that we check out at Amazon. And we most Americans, I'm sure, just we spend a hell of a lot of money on Amazon. So I'm excited that Fold has the gift card rewards for Amazon right now. So yeah, it's good stuff, man. And I think Lolly or Fold could put together something like Square did with their really amazing kind of intro to Bitcoin, that kind of the illustrated like almost cartoon style, very simple and direct explanation of Bitcoin, in the app. And I think that would go a long way.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
then you could whoever writes the Bitcoin for Moms book could just kind of do some little advertising at the end of that.
Totally.
For more, buy this book.
I'm sure it'll happen. Uh, how you doing on time?
I'm good on time. I got like another half hour.
Yeah, okay, okay. I didn't realize we're an hour and 20 minutes in, but I wanted to get to the rapid fire questions. But did you have anything else you wanted to jam on before we do that?
Oh no, man, I think we covered a lot of ground. That was a lot of fun, and I'm like so jacked up right now. Like I'm
Me
gonna have to
too.
like go to the gym and get some of this energy out.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm gonna do. It's 10:30 p.m., so I might have to go for a late night run or something.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So, what is money?
Money represents the value of a person's time and is the means for that value to be exchanged for goods or services.
If you had to explain Bitcoin to your grandmother or someone over 80, what would you say?
Bitcoin is the future of money.
What is the primary reason why Bitcoin is important or interesting to you?
Well, this one's definitely changed over time, but I'd say right now the primary reason Bitcoin's interesting to me are what we talked about a lot in the further discussion part of the episode. The secondary effects of the adjustment of a person's time preference. That Bitcoin, as the soundest money ever created, inspires in people. Like we talked about, being more thoughtful about the future, more disciplined, more productive, healthier, being a better person in general. I think those are just profound effects of that time preference adjustment, and that's super interesting to me right now, and I've been really inspired by that.
What does the quote unquote sovereign individual mean to you?
Personal responsibility.
How long after you first heard of Bitcoin did you start learning more about it and purchase it? if you're comfortable saying?
It was probably about, I'd say probably 5 years after I first heard about it that I really started to learn about it, which is sad to say, but it's true.
Uh, what movie or song is most related to Bitcoin in your opinion?
Well, I guess it's not a movie, but you know, I guess you could consider it a movie. It's a TV show, which is kind of the movies of our time, I guess. Mr. Robot deals explicitly with Bitcoin and like a corporate coin like Libra or XRP, and kind of the end of the Keynesian cult's rule over our money. So I think that's a really interesting show. I love it.
Speaking of XRP, did you catch the interview with Pomp and Garlinghouse?
I I did.
What did you think about that?
Um, I mean, you know, I was disappointed a bit that he was, you know, kind of given that platform because Palm's platform is huge. Um, I think there wasn't like kind of sufficient pushback to a lot of Garlinghouse's claims, and I think he, you know, he's a great CEO for Ripple because he's, you know, sounds very reasonable, and I think, you know, there's probably some damage done on that front, and also like I'm a little pissed off that Brad Garlinghouse is a Jayhawk. He's
He's,
from the University of Kansas. He graduated from the University of Kansas, which
oh,
was my alma mater, and you know I still live in this college town, and so that's disappointing to me. Yeah. Anyway,
favorite movie clip or rant of all time?
well, there's this scene in the movie Waking Life by Richard Linklater. I think it came out in like early 2000s. Really cool movie, and I haven't seen it for a long time, but I was reminded of it talking to Gigi on that episode the other day, and I mentioned it on that episode. There's this scene. I'll send you the link to it so you can put it in the show notes. But there's a scene where the main character he just kind of like walks between this conversation, sort of in this waking dream that he's in. Sort of, so the main character is sitting down at a coffee shop with this like crazy, like crazy haired professor. You know, looks kind of like an Einstein-like character, and he's just like talking super fast. And it's this idea has stuck with me for a long time, and I think about it that we're living through this right now. But he talks about the evolution of the organism in three ways. He talks about it like biological, anthropological, and cultural. And what we've seen over time is like the evolution of population. So like 2 billion years, it took 2 billion years for life itself to sort of evolve. And then like 6 million years for the hominid to evolve. And then 100,000 years for like mankind to evolve from the hominid, mankind as we know it. And he calls it the telescopic nature of evolution. And then you have like the agricultural, you know, stage was like 10,000 years. Scientific revolution is like 400 years. Industrial revolution another 150. And then he talks about this new evolution, and all of that telescopic evolution is sort of leading to this sort of, some people call it the singularity, this point in time. And this new evolution that will happen in our lifetime will stem from information, digital and analog, AI and biology, and we'll knit the two together with like neurobiology. And in the new paradigm, will exist as like this mutually supportive grouping. Like it's evolution will become like an individually centered process that emanates from the needs and desires of the individual, and it won't be like a passive process where the individual is sort of at the whim of the collective, right? The classical idea of Darwin's evolution. And then this sort of intelligence will pile on this intelligence, and we'll reach this crescendo, and we'll have the amplification of the individual. The individual will no longer be restricted by time and space. The old evolution, the idea is like the old evolution is kind of this cold, sterile, efficient process. Parasitism, dominance, the values of war, morality, and then those like values will be subject to de-evolution or de-emphasis, and like the new evolutionary paradigm will give us like emphasize the human traits of loyalty and justice and freedom and all of those, you know, positive things. So it's a very like optimistic view of the idea of the singularity, and it's stuck with me for a long time. And the idea that we're living through it right now, and that Bitcoin's a part of that, and I get to be a part of Bitcoin at this early stage is like super exciting, as we've been talking about this whole episode.
Jeez, yeah, fuck, that sounds amazing. What was the book or
You
movie
gotta.
again?
It's called Waking Life, and
Waking
it's
Life.
sort of it's kind of like a cult classic, I guess you could call it. Really, really cool movie. This dude in Texas, Richard Linklater. He's made some other movies too. What's that one with? I think he made that one with. Oh man, name's escaping me right now. But like um, that dude. He's like, oh, you'd be a whole lot cooler if you did. You have any weed on you? He's like, no. Oh, you'd be
Uh,
a whole lot cooler if you
Dazed and
did.
Confused, isn't it?
Dazed and Confused. I think he directed Dazed and Confused too.
Right.
So he's got some other like popular movies out there, but this was sort of his personal like passion project. And he's just a really uh, you know curious dude, a really smart guy, and he wrote this movie, and it's sort of like it's animated. So they shot it with video footage, and then they have like something like 40 different animators use different styles, and they kind of like drew over the video footage, and so it's got this really like trippy animation. It changes from scene to scene. It's just a really cool movie. Everyone should go
Wow.
watch Wake. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out for sure. Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
I think short of some change to the laws of physics or the extinction of humanity, I don't think Bitcoin can be stopped at this point. I mean, the like we talked earlier, the extent to which it succeeds could be debatable. I have certain convictions on that extent, and I think it will be, the one money that we have for humanity eventually. Um, I think, given some other catastrophe besides those two, based, very unlikely scenarios, I'd say, we can reboot the system. We have a copy of the ledger, the redundancy of which ensures its survival.
What was your most recent aha or level up in your understanding of Bitcoin? Something you learned recently.
Yeah, I got to go back to the idea of the follow-on effects of time preference adjustment, and like I kind of understood that idea, reading through some Austrian economics texts and Bitcoin Standard, et cetera. But I think I've really begun to experience it personally recently, and so it's really sunk in on kind of a deeper level, and it's what I've been thinking about a lot in terms of Bitcoin lately.
When, if ever, do you think the first central bank will start adding Bitcoin to their reserves, and will they even exist in 20 years?
I mean, I'd be surprised if it weren't happening already. Probably via mining, since it's the most private way to procure Bitcoin, most anonymous way. It doesn't affect the spot price, because you don't, it doesn't need to be bought. So it's kind of a quiet way to accumulate. I mean, I'm sure it's happening at this point. I would be really surprised if it wasn't. I think governments will simply abandon central banks, and move to a Bitcoin-based economy eventually. I think, once it happens, the first one will sort of trigger like a crescendo of central banks just being deprecated, basically. 20 years, it's hard to tell. It's hard to call. Like, I think that'll be like right around the time that it will be happening, and I think we could see like a central bank, like the Federal Reserve might persist longer than any other central bank. That's kind of like, the final boss. The Federal Reserve and the Bank for International Settlements are sort of the final boss for Bitcoin, and I think those will be kind of the last two standing in that battle.
Biggest mistake you've made with Bitcoin?
uh, Shitcoins.
How do you feel about Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's creator, being anonymous and the coins that he likely controls?
Well, I think Satoshi's anonymity is crucial to Bitcoin, and I think it's clear that Satoshi thought the same. I believe that Satoshi intended for his coins as early mining rewards to be left untouched forever. Um, I think that the keys were destroyed. I think Satoshi probably destroyed those keys, and that, yeah, they're just not accessible.
Most controversial or contrarian view or opinion, if none on Bitcoin, any subject is okay.
Um, Man, I think Bitcoin itself is a controversial and contrarian opinion at this point. I mean, it's still really early, um, but yeah, I mean, I think we have to consider it contrarian still at this point.
Well, what would be contrarian to Bitcoiners? Do you have anything in that vein?
Uh, um, I don't know if I do. Um, One idea that I think may be gaining a little bit more traction, but I first heard it from Pierre Rochard, is that every UTXO on the base layer will be either the opening or closing of a lightning channel at some
Interesting.
point in the future.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, Ballpark estimate, excuse me, of Bitcoin's price in 5 years.
Uh, I'll say, well, I was gonna say like somewhere between 500,000 and a million. So we'll just like split the difference and say 750,000.
Do you have a morning routine? If so, what is it?
Yeah, I do. It's kind of different between the school year and the summer. So like right now we're in the school year, so I get up around 6. I hang out with my dog, listen to some calm music, maybe stretch a little bit. Then I start making breakfast. I wake up my kids and my wife, and we have some breakfast. And then I get the kids off to school. I go straight to the gym, and I either swim or lift, depending on the day, and hit the steam room. Steam room is huge. It's like kept me like through winters here. I don't get respiratory like colds anymore, really, especially in the wintertime. And I think it's great for circulation and just like general mood, and like fires up my brain. And then, I get to the office and start working, or I go home and work like by 9 or 9:30.
Nice. How do you define success?
I think, and this is hard to do, but I think being present to enjoy the feelings of satisfaction or contentment or happiness for myself and of my friends and family.
Has that been impacted, i.e., made easier via Bitcoin?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't think Bitcoin's really affected yet my ability to be present necessarily. I think, like I said, it's more like along the lines of, saving, being more responsible in that regard, more disciplines, uh, which has led to me being healthier. That discipline, that morning routine has really been instilled over the past couple of years because of a desire to be more productive.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as being present, I think that's more of like uh, a mental or spiritual challenge. And I'm not sure Bitcoin really touches that.
Did you hear Trey Mayer talk about how he uses like gold to focus his mind? Like it helps him
Yeah, yeah,
and like you can pet it and it focus. He says
yeah,
like you can pet your gold and it focuses your mind, And he was
yeah, man.
really got
I
into it
laughed.
for a
I
few
laughed out
minutes.
loud at that. I looked at that. I laughed out loud at that. That was hilarious. Just imagining like Trace like sitting in like like some kind of cross-legged position, like back straight up, and he's just like petting his gold and meditating.
Yeah, like a big bar of gold right in front of him on his lap.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Most impactful book you've ever read?
Oh, I would say the Bitcoin Standard at this point, because that was just like right at my kind of inflection points in my conviction about Bitcoin. Before that, Moby Dick. I read that in college and had a great professor. I took an entire semester on that book, and it was just an absolute work of genius. And it's talk about rabbit holes. Like you can read that book and like all of the references and allusions that it makes to all of the like great works of humanity are in there. So you could just use that as a kind of a jumping off point into just studying all of humanities and philosophy and just everything basically.
Awesome. Go-to
Yeah.
place to learn more about Bitcoin.
Bitcoin Twitter. That's the I think Bitcoin education just kind of branches off from there. It's all shared there. It's all announced there. It's distilled there. The drafts are usually of like Medium articles and books sort of start organically on Twitter and explored there on Twitter, and you get feedback and then people distill them into amazing contributions to the growing library of Bitcoin education.
Totally. What is one piece of advice or something you could tell people that if they want to up their game regarding Bitcoin or really anything, but what's one piece of advice you would give to people?
Um, I mean, I just say be curious, be intellectually curious. Read a lot, listen to podcasts, listen to audiobooks. I use audio a ton. I'd say, if you are not at a point in your life where you have a lot of time to yourself to read, I love reading, and I just the act of reading I think is better than the sort of more passive experience of audio or audio books. But I love the audio format because it allows me to, just read, quote unquote, read so much more. I listen to it at the gym. I listen to it in the morning, like mornings while I'm making breakfast and stuff, like I mentioned, doing yard work, walking my dog, like pushing my kids on the swing, which, like I have my son will just like swing for like literally like 2 hours if you let him. So I'll take him over to the park and it just like totally chills him out. It's one of his things. And so we'll go there and I'll turn on some music or an audiobook for him to listen to, and I'll stick an earbud in and listen to Bitcoin podcasts and just push him on this, things like that. It's just, yeah, driving, all that. So it's a great way to take in a lot more information and content.
Yep. What is one question you'd like to see added to this list?
Oh yeah, I remember this question now, and I wanted to prepare something for it, but I forgot to do that. I would say, um, what are the three most impactful podcast episodes you've listened to? Bitcoin podcast episodes. Um, yeah, I think it's, people recommend podcasts in general all the time, but we don't surface great episodes as much. I'm kind of working on a way to make that a little easier for everyone, but yeah, I like to ask people not just what podcasts they love to listen to, but what particular episodes like stand out in their memory.
What are your three?
Um,
Put you on the spot.
yeah. So a recent one that I think goes on the all-time classics list is the noted podcast with Warren Davidson, who's a representative in U.S. Congress. He's the guy that I think will go down in history for entering the word shitcoin into the congressional record. And I think that was kind of a milestone for Bitcoin podcasts, to have a member of the United States Congress on and talking about Bitcoin. That's a first, as far as I know.
I listened to
So
that
that was
today.
big.
It was.
Yeah.
I came off and I actually tweeted. I was like, "Well, that's encouraging." I just couldn't believe that this is the way a
Yes.
congressman was talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael and Pierre did a fantastic job on that.
Yeah.
Um, the the Murad and Nasir Mamedov episodes on Pomp were amazing. Those definitely stick out in my mind. There's a ton of TFTC episodes that were formative for me, through early 2018, late 2017. One that I think doesn't get as much uh, recognition, but I really loved, was one with Matt Odell and Johnny Dilly, who's I think might be working at Blockstream now, or at least did in the recent past. Um, just like one of those polymaths that Trace talks about, I think, and just has really unique insights, I think, about Bitcoin, the way he phrases things, the way he thinks about things. And that was sort of, I think, one of the episodes where Matt Odell really put himself on the TFDC map. I don't think they were doing Rabbit Hole Recap yet at that point, or maybe they had just started. But I mean, he drops a ton of wisdom in that episode as well. So that one sticks out in my mind.
Nice. All right, word association time. You know the drill.
Okay.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Genius.
Government.
Oversized.
Hash rate.
Security.
The individual.
Solitary.
Security.
Hash rate.
Ego.
Self.
Greed.
excess,
Stacking sats.
tithing,
Fiat currency.
theft,
Guns.
um, important,
Citizen Bitcoin.
fun,
Altcoins.
scams,
Pizza.
tempting,
Socialism.
naive,
Family.
paramount,
Trump.
clown,
Future.
Bitcoin,
Libra.
joke,
Gold.
petable,
And Bitcoin.
life.
Brady, man, this was awesome. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for granting me the time and coming on. I knew it was going to be fun. I was excited all day, but it over delivered as far as I'm concerned.
That was a great time, man. It was awesome. Really great to meet you. Like I said earlier, I've been really digging your podcast. I think you're putting out a high quality product, and I hope everyone, if they haven't subscribed yet, does that right now.
Well, thank you, man. And I feel exactly the same way with your pod. Been a fan for a long time, and yeah, I love your work. So you keep it up as well. Do you want to direct anyone who's not familiar with your stuff to any of your destinations?
Yeah, the podcast website is citizenbitcoin.world. And I'm on Bitcoin Twitter at Citizen Bitcoin. So those are really just the two things you need. Subscribe to the podcast. There's a great archive in there that's grown into, I think, just a lot of fun, informational, bullish podcasts.
A lot of awesome guests, really awesome guests.
Great guest list. And yeah, it's just going to keep going. I've got one with Hass McCook coming up this week.
That's going to be a bullish one.
Yeah, I wanted to get Gigi and Hass back to back because I heard from both of them that they had Hass put it on your podcast, I think, that they made sweet music together in Rico. Yeah. So I heard that, and I was already planning to talk to Gigi, and I was like, just wrote Hass. I was like, all right, man, I got to follow up my talk with Gigi with you, apparently. So
when I spoke to them, they were working on something that they couldn't reveal. So I don't know when the big reveal is coming, but I'm sure it'll be interesting.
Yeah, no doubt.
Anyways, man, again, thank you so much. And I look forward to meeting in Meet Space someday. But until then, take care of yourself. And yeah, all the best.
All right. Appreciate it, man. Take care.
All right, brother. Later.
Later.